Imagine walking into a room full of your closest former colleagues,
Oh,
and absolutely no one recognizes you.
wow, that is a wild scenario.
Right. And not because you've aged or because you got, like, a radical haircut,
Hmm.
but because you have completely medically and cosmetically overwritten your racial identity.
I mean, that just makes the air in the room get thick, doesn't it?
It really does, because you've altered your skin, your features, your hair, to the point where the physical reality of who you were for, say, the first 40 years of your life is just gone.
Erased.
Exactly. Erased and replaced. And welcome to Reality Check with Twanna Yvette.
It is so good to be here for this.
Today we are doing a deep dive into something that forces you to confront assumptions you probably didn't even know you held.
Yeah, assumptions about what actually makes a person who they are.
So the mission for today's deep dive is unpacking a question from our source material that is intensely uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
But it's also impossible to look away from once you start peeling back the layers. The question is, can a person physically change their race?
And we need to be incredibly precise right out of the gate here. So you, the listener, know exactly what we are talking about today.
Right, let's define the scope.
We are not talking about moving to a new neighborhood or, adopting a different culture.
Or changing your friend group.
Exactly.
Mhm.
We aren't talking about the music you listen to or the clothes you wear. We are talking about altering actual, observable, physical, biological presentation.
The fundamental phenotypic reality.
Right. Because the moment you ask if someone can physically change their race, a whole cascade of incredibly thorny questions drops right on top of you.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, are we looking at the ultimate expression of personal freedom and bodily autonomy?
Or is this an unrecognized psychological crisis playing out in public?
Or, is it a manifestation of profound systemic self-hatred?
And because those questions carry so much weight, we need to establish our ground rules for this deep dive.
We have to.
We are not dealing in hypotheticals today. I promise you, the listener, we are going to look at real, documented cases from the text.
We are navigating the pain, the physiological mechanics, and the underlying philosophy.
And we are doing it without jumping to easy 5-second conclusions. Because if you answer a question like this in 5 seconds, you aren't actually taking it seriously.
No, you really need time to sit with the friction. The cognitive dissonance here is kind of the whole point.
So let's step right into that friction. Let's look at the first real-world example from our source material.
Donna Briggs.
Yes, Donna Briggs. Let's set the historical scene here. If you worked in or followed the black radio industry about a decade ago, you very likely knew Donna Briggs.
She was a highly recognizable, successful black woman in the industry.
Extremely recognizable. She was out on red carpets, sitting down in studios, interviewing absolute heavy hitters.
I mean, we were talking Mary J. Blige,
Tyler Perry.
Viola Davis, cultural titans.
And she was right there in the mix, a total fixture in that specific media ecosystem.
There are literally hundreds of photos, hours of video footage, countless witnesses, producers, camera operators, fellow journalists.
People who worked with her and interacted with her as a recognizable black woman.
That is the objective baseline historical reality.
Right.
But if you were to look at Donna Briggs today, the contrast is so jarring, it almost breaks your brain.
The physical transformation is absolute.
She now presents with platinum blonde hair, starkly pale skin, and altered facial features.
If you did not know her history, if you just passed her on the street, you would never guess that she was a black woman who built her career in black media.
Never. And the visual shift alone is enough to spark a million conversations about identity and aesthetics.
But what elevates this case from a physical curiosity into a deep psychological and societal puzzle is her defense.
Yes. How she actively frames this change to the public. Because she doesn't just say, I decided to change how I look.
No, she insists that nothing happened. She claims she was never black in the first place.
Which is staggering.
It really is. When you have an entire industry holding photographic and video receipts of your existence, looking directly into a camera and saying, "I was never black," requires a level of denial that is hard to even comprehend.
I'm just trying to understand the sheer mechanics of that denial. I mean, how does she explain the old red carpet photos?
Or the complexion she clearly had while interviewing Tyler Perry.
Right. How do you explain that away?
Well, according to the text, her stated explanation is that her previously darker complexion was the result of a quote-unquote deep spray tan.
A deep spray tan.
A deep spray tan that she apparently maintained flawlessly day in and day out throughout her entire broadcasting career.
Okay, and what about the pale skin she has today?
She claims that is her natural biological baseline.
Wait, really?
Yeah. She says this natural paleness was finally revealed because she started aggressively avoiding the sun and adopted a strict vegan lifestyle.
Wait, a vegan lifestyle and staying out of the sun? That is the structural load-bearing beam of her explanation.
That is her defense.
Going from a recognizable black woman in black radio to a pale, platinum blonde woman who vehemently denies ever being black, and it's because of a vegan diet.
That's what she claims.
I want you, listening right now, to just sit with the magnitude of that claim.
And the public reaction has been exactly what you would expect when society is asked to swallow that level of reality bending.
It's a potent mixture of absolute shock and profound confusion.
You have former colleagues going on the record literally saying they do not recognize the person standing in front of them today.
And inevitably, the social media sleuths got involved.
Oh, of course they did.
They started doing forensic deep dives into her digital history, pulling up all these old interviews that directly contradict her new narrative.
And the text notes that the fallout essentially split into two camps.
What are the two camps?
Well, on one side, people view this purely cynically. They accuse her of scamming, assuming this is some sort of long con grift for an unspecified financial or social benefit.
And the other side?
The other side of the reaction, and this is where we get into much murkier, more empathetic waters, centers on genuine concern for a psychological crisis.
Which makes sense.
Right, because when someone completely denies an observable, lived reality, you have to wonder if something deeper has fractured.
It really makes me think about how we manage our digital footprints.
How do you mean?
Well, if you decide today that you want to wipe your entire online presence, you can try. You can delete your Twitter, your Instagram, take down your personal website.
Sure.
But you know the Internet Archive exists. You know people took screenshots of your bad takes 5 years ago. You can never truly 100% erase a public digital archive.
That's a perfect analogy. The internet is forever, as they say.
Exactly. But what Donna Briggs is attempting feels like trying to delete a permanent digital archive, but with her physical biology and her personal history.
Yeah.
She is looking at the screenshots of her life, the literal videos of her with Mary J. Blige, and telling society, your eyes are lying to you. So I want to push on this idea of autonomy. If someone completely rewrites their personal history and actively denies their physical reality, do we respect that as a personal choice? Or is it a sign of something troubling?
That is the pivotal friction point in the text.
At what point does respecting their personal choice just become participating in a shared delusion?
Well, if we operate entirely under the absolute banner of personal choice, then we might be forced into a corner where we have to say, okay, she says she was never black. She says it was a spray tan, so we must validate her current narrative.
But that simplicity completely collapses when you factor in other people. The truth, the witnesses, the history, they don't disappear just because one individual wants them to.
They really don't.
It forces us to define what respecting a choice actually means in a functional society. Does respecting autonomy require us to override the evidence of our own senses?
Because people who knew her intimately are holding the reality of their lived experience with her in one hand and her total denial in the other.
When a personal choice requires the absolute erasure of objective past reality, it moves out of the realm of simple self-expression and into a demand for collective amnesia.
A demand for collective amnesia. That is a massive demand to place on the people around you.
It really is.
It's essentially gaslighting on a biological level. But as fascinating and troubling as Donna Briggs's attempt to run away from a black identity is, she is ultimately trying to erase the past.
Right.
What happens when that exact same psychological engine runs in reverse? The text shows someone doing the exact opposite.
Yes. Let's talk about Martina Big.
Tell me about Martina Big.
So Martina Big is a German model. And unlike Donna Briggs, her starting point is completely undisputed. She was born white.
Okay, so a white German model. That is her documented biological and historical reality.
Yes.
What is her transformation process? Because the text makes it sound fundamentally different from just a change in lifestyle.
It is radically different. Where Briggs claims she simply stopped tanning, Martina Big actively sought out intense medical interventions to fundamentally alter her racial presentation.
What kind of interventions?
She dramatically darkened her skin using synthetic melanin injections and various other intense medical treatments.
Let's pause on that because I want to understand the how here. A melanin injection isn't like picking up a bottle of bronzer at the pharmacy.
No. Not at all.
What are we actually talking about physiologically?
We are talking about injecting synthetic hormones. They are analogs of melanocyte-stimulating hormones that actually force your body's cells to hyperproduce melanin.
Wow.
It is a profound, chemically induced, systemic alteration of how her skin functions.
And she didn't stop at the epidermis.
She didn't.
No, she also underwent surgical procedures to alter her facial features and her hair texture to specifically mimic Black aesthetics.
And there is a crucial detail here from the source material that adds an incredibly strange layer to the dynamic.
Her husband, right?
Yes, her husband, Michael. The text notes, he reportedly began taking the exact same medications to follow her lead.
So this ceased to be an isolated individual choice. It became a shared physical transition within their marriage.
A shared physical transition. That is wild.
It is.
But the contrast between these two women is what I find so compelling. Donna Briggs is hiding her past, inventing stories about veganism, and demanding everyone look the other way.
Right.
Martina Big is leaning into the microphone and shouting her story from the rooftops.
She is entirely open about her transition. She isn't claiming she was secretly Black all along.
No, she is hyper-transparent about her starting point and her medical journey.
What does she actually claim then?
She explicitly states that she, quote-unquote, fell in love with Black skin and consciously, purposefully chose to change her own body to match that aesthetic.
And now?
And now, as a direct result of those medical and cosmetic changes, she publicly identifies as a Black woman.
She is running toward Blackness, openly and enthusiastically. Which brings us to a deceptively simple question that has a massively complicated answer.
The philosophical debate.
Yes. Is Martina Big Black?
If you poll the average person based on the text, the instinctive reaction is a very hard, visceral no.
I think my instinctive reaction is a hard no. But let's break down the arguments for why the answer is no, according to the source. If she has the physical markers, what is she missing?
There are two main pillars to why society largely rejects her new identity. First is the biological and historical reality. She was simply not born Black. She doesn't possess the genetic lineage.
Okay.
But second, and this is what really drives the modern discourse, she completely lacks the lived experience of being Black in the world.
That lived experience metric is the absolute linchpin. Being Black isn't just a hex code you can dial up on a color wheel. It is an intricate web of historical, familial, and social realities. You grow up experiencing the world through a specific lens, navigating specific cultural touchstones, community bonds, and, crucially, the systemic prejudices that society places on that demographic.
Martina Big bypassed all of that.
She basically skipped the journey and parachuted into the destination.
Exactly. She arrived at the aesthetic finish line without running the race. Therefore, her change is fundamentally categorized as a purely cosmetic transformation. It is literally skin deep.
Oh, hold on. If we agree it is purely cosmetic, that opens up a whole new set of uncomfortable questions from the text.
It really does.
If it's just cosmetic, if she isn't actually Black, what exactly is she doing? Is she delusional? Does she genuinely believe the injections altered her actual reality?
Or is it just extreme obsessive aesthetic appreciation? Like she just really loves the look.
And if it is just appreciation, does she have the right to claim the title? To stand in public and say, I am a Black woman, when she hasn't carried the weight of that life?
I want to challenge us to push on this idea of appreciation, because this is where the cultural line gets very blurry for me.
Where is the line?
Yeah, where is the boundary between admiring a culture or an aesthetic and completely appropriating the identity? Because if a white person says, I think Black features and dark skin are the most beautiful physical traits in the world, and I want to emulate that because I revere it, in a vacuum, that sounds like the ultimate compliment, right?
In a vacuum, sure.
But the moment they cross the medical threshold and claim the identity, it feels like a massive violation. Why does extreme appreciation suddenly curdle into offense?
Because identity is not just a costume you can rent. It is inextricably tied to community and survival. When you appropriate the physical markers of a historically marginalized group without carrying any of the historical weight or the societal vulnerability that comes from actually being born into that group, it feels inherently like a mockery, even if the stated intent is love.
It's the ultimate privilege. You are taking the beauty without the burden.
Taking the beauty without the burden.
Right. You get to wear the aesthetic, but you can wash it off or stop taking the injections the moment society becomes hostile. People born into that reality do not have an off switch.
That is a very heavy way to frame it. Taking the beauty without the burden.
Now, we have to recognize that Donna Briggs and Martina Big are extreme outliers. They are hypervisible internet spectacles who have gone to massive lengths to alter their physical realities.
But if we zoom out, this connects to a much larger, quieter, global reality.
Right, proving this isn't just an internet spectacle.
Exactly. The desire to radically change one's skin color is a massive structural, societal industry.
Let's get into section 3 here. Let's talk about the multi-billion-dollar reality of skin lightening. What is the global scope we are actually looking at?
The global scope is genuinely staggering. We aren't talking about a niche subculture. Skin lightening is a massive global market.
It's everywhere.
It is ubiquitous across massive populations in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. It is not rare.
You can walk into neighborhood pharmacies or grocery stores in many of these regions and find rows upon rows of skin bleaching creams.
So let's analyze the mechanics of this, the how and the why, because it's vital we understand what's actually happening. How do these creams actually work, and why is this a multi-billion-dollar economic force?
Physiologically, many of the most effective and honestly most dangerous skin bleaching agents use chemicals like hydroquinone.
Hydroquinone.
Right, hydroquinone literally inhibits tyrosinase, which is the enzyme your body uses to produce melanin. So you are systematically breaking down your skin's natural biological defense mechanism against UV radiation to strip it of its color.
You are actively disabling a function of your own biology.
Yes, you are.
And what about the why?
The why is deeply rooted in the mechanics of colorism. And the text makes a vital distinction here.
What is the distinction?
The millions of people using these products are generally not trying to change their race entirely in the way Donna Briggs or Martina Big are attempting.
Right. A woman in Jamaica or India using a bleaching cream isn't waking up and saying, I want to become a Caucasian person.
They aren't trying to erase their racial category. Instead, they were trying to access the tangible privileges associated with lighter skin within their own societies.
That is the functional definition of colorism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In many of these post-colonial societies, lighter skin is deeply systemically associated with elevated beauty standards, higher social status, and vastly greater economic and social opportunities.
It's a pragmatic calculation.
It is a brutally pragmatic survivalist calculation. If the society you live in demonstrably rewards lighter skin with better jobs, higher salaries, better marriage prospects, and generally better treatment from authority figures, then lightening your skin isn't just vanity.
No, it becomes a tool for socioeconomic advancement.
Precisely.
But the result is still a physical, chemical alteration of their natural state. And this brings us to what I found to be the most heartbreaking part of all this source material.
The core emotional question.
Yes. There is a pivotal quote from the text shared by a Black Christian friend of the author who was trying to make sense of the Donna Briggs story and the skin lightening industry.
I know exactly the quote you mean.
And this friend asked a deeply raw, emotional question. They asked, how could a person hate the color of their skin so much?
That quote really cuts through everything, doesn't it?
It stops you in your tracks. It cuts right through all the academic jargon. It cuts through the sociological definitions of colorism and the philosophical debates about bodily autonomy.
It bypasses the intellect and goes straight to the raw human pain underneath all of this.
We need to spend some time unpacking this quote, because it highlights that beneath the multi-billion-dollar economic engine of the bleaching industry, beneath the dramatic cosmetic procedures of internet personalities, there is a fundamental gaping wound.
A wound regarding identity, belonging, and self-worth.
To undergo daily, literal chemical burns from bleaching creams, or to deny your past entirely and rewrite your history, points to profound internal hemorrhage. And these are wounds that cosmetics cannot actually heal.
Right. You are trying to treat a fractured sense of self-worth with a topical melanin inhibitor.
Exactly.
The use of the word hate in that quote is so striking because it frames the end result of this colorism as a literal rejection of one's own identity.
It's a rejection of your family lineage, your ancestors, and ultimately a rejection of your own reflection in the mirror.
To look at your natural, healthy body and feel compelled to chemically bleach away what is naturally there, that implies a level of internalized hatred that is just devastating to consider.
Let's try to conceptualize that pressure with an analogy.
Okay.
Imagine you work at a massive corporation, and the strictly mandated unspoken uniform for this company includes wearing shoes that are 2 sizes too small. Every single day you put these shoes on, they physically hurt you, they cause severe blisters, they deform your feet over time, but if you don't wear them, you don't get promoted. You get ridiculed in the break room. You might even lose your job entirely.
That sounds like torture.
Right. But eventually, over years of this, you might look at your own natural, healthy feet and start to resent them. You might wish you had smaller feet. You might even elect to have an incredibly painful surgery to alter the bone structure of your feet just so the mandated shoes fit better and the daily pain of societal rejection stops.
That analogy perfectly crystallizes the tension here. I mean, wearing a socially mandated uniform that hurts you to put on.
It really does.
If we look at skin lightening through the lens of those shoes, I have to ask, are these millions of people actually rejecting their own reflections? Are they harboring spontaneous, deep-seated self-hatred?
Or are they simply trying to survive in a rigged world that has systemically penalized their natural appearance?
Are they just trying to make the painful uniform fit?
It is almost entirely the latter based on the text. It's the difference between an organic internal hatred and a taught, conditioned response to external crushing pressure. This is a systemic issue. When an entire society equates light skin with humanity, beauty, and opportunity, the individual's choice to bleach is less about rejecting themselves in a vacuum and more about navigating a hostile environment.
But the ultimate tragedy is that the method of navigation still requires them to wage a chemical war on their own physical bodies.
Right.
Even if it's just a tactic to survive the uniform, the act of altering yourself inherently reinforces the lie that your natural state was insufficient. You internalize the oppression, and you become the enforcer of the very standard that is hurting you.
It's a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle, and it inevitably brings up a conversation that is dominating our modern cultural landscape.
The transgender comparison.
Exactly. Because this desire to alter one's physical body to match an internal feeling or to alleviate a societal pressure, it naturally leads to this section of the text titled Born in the Wrong Skin.
Now, we need to be incredibly clear here with impartial framing for you, the listener.
Yes, strictly impartial.
We are introducing this comparison strictly as an analytical framework provided by the source material. We are looking at the mechanics of these arguments impartially to understand how society categorizes identity.
Right, we are not taking sides. We are just exploring the logic as the text presents it.
The framework naturally arises because the underlying logic seems, on the surface, parallel.
How so?
Well, the text explains that the transgender community asserts that a person's internal gender identity can differ from their physical sex observed at birth. Therefore, medical transition aligns the physical body with the internal reality.
The question the text then asks is, can we port that exact established logic over to race? Can someone have an internal racial identity that does not match their physical body?
Can a person literally be born in the wrong skin? Which brings us right back to Martina Big. If she claims she feels internally black, does she have the same fundamental right to align her body as someone who feels internally a different gender? Let's look at the scholarly consensus on this presented in the text.
The consensus is a definitive rejection of the comparison.
A complete rejection.
Yes, most scholars, and significantly the vast majority of voices within the transgender community itself, completely reject the idea of transracialism as a valid parallel.
Okay, I want to push back on that just analytically. Why? If both involve a feeling of internal misalignment with the physical body, what is the hard distinction they're making?
The distinction lies in the fundamental biological and historical origins of these two concepts.
Okay, break that down.
Gender identity is increasingly understood to have recognized biological and psychological roots that form very early in human development. It is viewed as a deeply ingrained intrinsic sense of self.
Conversely, racial identity has absolutely no equivalent scientific consensus independent of ancestry and lived experience. Race is inherited. It is familial. It is deeply, inextricably historical.
So the argument is that you can't have a black brain in a white body.
Exactly. As the text frames it, you cannot be born white in a black family in the way a trans girl can be born physically male within any family line.
Race is an unbroken chain of lineage. Gender identity is a distinct individual development.
Okay, so the consensus rejects the comparison based on the fundamental nature of what race and gender actually are. But there is an autonomy paradox here that is really hard to shake.
The autonomy paradox is huge here.
If modern Western society fiercely champions absolute bodily autonomy, allowing changes to gender, legal name, facial structure, tattoos, on what logical grounds is this race? the hard, uncrossable boundary.
Right. It asks if this boundary is just a current social taboo that we haven't broken yet, or if race is so fundamentally different in its nature that the boundary can never legitimately be crossed.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. If the absolute core tenet of modern personal freedom is my body, my choice, then doesn't telling Martina Biggs she cannot be black violate that very rule?
That is the friction.
If she is an adult, not physically harming anyone else, using her own resources to alter her body, who is society to step in and say, no, your autonomy stops at melanin? Does absolute bodily autonomy have a permanent asterisk next to the word race?
That is the exact paradox the source material grapples with. If autonomy is truly absolute, then there are no asterisks. Martina Biggs' choices would be immune to criticism.
But the reality is that society largely recoils at her actions. This visceral recoil suggests that we do not actually believe autonomy is absolute. We instinctively believe there are invisible lines tied to history that cannot simply be surgically bypassed.
And answering whether we can or should draw these lines forces us to look past the incredible medical technology we have. It forces us to look at the underlying moral worldviews that govern how we see the human body in the first place.
Which brings us to the next massive question from the text. Just because you can, does that make it right?
Exactly. Section 5. We have established the technological reality. The technology to bleach your skin exists. The medical ability to inject synthetic melanin exists. The social media platforms to try and rewrite your personal history exist.
The freedom to do these things, practically speaking, is unimpeded. You can begin this radical transformation today.
But having the technological ability and the legal freedom does not automatically confer moral rightness upon the action. So, let's impartially examine the two major moral worldviews presented regarding this act.
Let's start with the secular perspective.
Okay, how does a purely secular worldview approach the morality of changing your race?
From a purely secular worldview presented in the text, the moral calculus is heavily rooted in the concept of bodily autonomy. The argument goes, if it is your body, and it is your choice, and you are not causing direct physical harm to another non-consenting person, then there is no inherent moral issue.
Under this specific view, changing your race cosmetically is entirely a matter of personal aesthetic preference. It is morally neutral. You might find Donna Briggs's denial strange, but it cannot be categorized as morally wrong because it doesn't violate anyone else's direct rights.
Okay, wait, I want to push back on that secular harm reduction model. Couldn't someone argue that Martina Biggs is causing harm? Not physical harm, but societal harm. By turning a marginalized identity into a costume, isn't she perpetuating a harmful caricature? Doesn't that violate the spirit of the harm principle?
That is the exact counter-argument within secular circles. The debate becomes about defining harm. Is cultural appropriation a form of measurable harm? If it is, then her autonomy is superseded by the harm she causes the community. But if harm is strictly physical damage, then she remains in the clear morally.
It's a fascinating gray area. Now let's impartially unpack the faith perspectives, specifically the Christian perspective detailed in the text. How does introducing a creator change the moral calculus of altering one's physical race?
It changes the entire foundational premise. The secular view starts with the premise that your body belongs entirely to you. The faith perspective starts with the premise that your body is an intentionally created vessel. If you believe God intentionally created your specific race, your specific family line, and your specific physical body with purpose, then radically altering that physical body is no longer just a cosmetic choice.
It elevates a medical act to the level of a profound theological statement. By fundamentally altering what you were born as, you're essentially communicating to the Creator, what you made was wrong, and I know better how to design myself.
What you made was wrong, and I know better. That is a massive shift in framing. It moves the action from neutral self-expression directly into active rebellion against design.
Yes, it is viewed as an active rejection of divine intention.
But I know there's a secondary layer to this faith perspective in the text that often gets lost in modern discourse: the lost art of nuance.
There is a crucial duality that often gets ignored. The same biblical framework that teaches God created humanity intentionally also demands profound grace, humility, and love for those who are struggling.
Right.
It insists that within this worldview, it is entirely possible to believe someone is making a profound mistake, rejecting their design out of pain, and still care deeply and genuinely about them as a human being.
How do we reclaim that? How do we reclaim the ability to look at someone and say, I believe this action is a mistake, without the world immediately hearing, I hate this person. Because right now, the moment you express disagreement, you are instantly categorized as hateful.
Reclaiming that nuance requires us to functionally separate the identity and value of the person from their actions. You can absolutely value the inherent humanity of Donna Briggs, and simultaneously you can firmly state that her biological denial is unhealthy and untrue. You don't have to affirm the fiction in order to love the person.
And the connective tissue between both of these worldviews, the desire to utilize one's autonomy in the secular view and the desire to change one's creation in the faith view, connects back to the central theme of the entire piece.
The underlying human suffering.
Yes, which brings us to section 6, the unresolved tension and the tragedy of self-hatred. We've covered the extreme cases, the global scale, the moral calculus. Let's look at what are ultimately the unchangeable elements of this struggle.
If we synthesize all this, there is a very clear boundary. We must acknowledge what can be changed. Medically, you can absolutely alter your physical phenotype. You can change your skin color, your hair. Legally, you might even be able to change your classification.
But there is a hard, unyielding line on what cannot be changed. Race is ancestry. It is bloodline. It is history. It is a shared communal reality forged over centuries. You cannot inject that into your veins. You cannot bleach it away.
Let's revisit our core examples through that specific lens of unchangeable reality. Think about Donna Briggs. She can dye her hair. She can repeat her narrative every single day. But the photos still remain. The historical record remains. The historical truth of her lived experience is an anchor that her current psychological denial simply cannot snap.
And the exact same unyielding reality applies to Martina Big. She can inject synthetic melanin until her skin is incredibly dark. She can legally identify as black, but she cannot artificially acquire the lived black experience. Her entire transformation heart stops at the epidermis.
And when we look at the millions of people participating in the global skin lightening industry, the unchangeable reality is that they are desperately altering the surface of their bodies, but they cannot individually alter the systemic prejudice that forces their hand.
So what is the root cause? After analyzing the mechanics and the sociology, what sits at the very center of all this identity shifting?
What brings it all back together?
Pain. It all radiates outward from deep, profound pain. The pain of racism and colorism, which systematically tells people they are lesser than based on a genetic lottery. The pain of identity confusion.
And crucially, the deeply alienating pain of not feeling at home in your own body. This profound discomfort is the powerful engine driving these radical changes.
Let's go back to that quote from earlier. How could a person hate the color of their skin so much? After exploring all of this source material, what is the answer the text suggests?
The answer is devastatingly sad, but deeply true. They learned it.
They learned it. It wasn't innate.
Exactly. Human beings are not born hating their own skin. We aren't born wanting to bleach ourselves to become someone else. The world taught them that who they naturally are isn't good enough.
It was a systemic, inescapable lesson.
Delivered by media representation, societal privilege, historical prejudice, and the ultimate tragedy is that instead of fighting that massive lie, they internalized it. They accepted the premise and decided to wage war on their own bodies to become someone else entirely.
Which leads to a really powerful reframing of how we should view this entire issue from the text's conclusion. We started this conversation by asking if this was self-hatred or autonomy. But we need to shift our emotional posture.
This isn't a sin to be aggressively condemned. It isn't a joke to be mocked.
It is a tragedy to be mourned.
Precisely. It is a tragedy. And because it is a tragedy born of learned self-hatred and crushing societal pressure, these individuals deserve our deep compassion rather than our outrage or ridicule. When people form mobs to mock Donna Briggs or laugh at the spectacle of Martina Big, they are reacting with shallow outrage. We are called to react with sorrow for the immense pain that drove them to those extremes.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear this topic is not going to be neatly resolved by the time we sign off today. Identity is going to remain one of the most complex, difficult, and messy things a human being can wrestle with.
People will absolutely continue to alter their bodies. The technology will only get better. Some will lighten their skin to survive colorism. Some will darken it. The human desire to feel comfortable in our own skin or to escape it is a powerful, chaotic force.
But the ultimate takeaway here regarding empathy is vital. You can hold your beliefs firmly without dehumanizing the people who oppose them.
You can believe in objective historical truth. You can believe that God makes no mistakes in creation. You can believe that lived experience is the only true definer of race.
You can hold those convictions, look at someone making choices you profoundly disagree with, and still have compassion for them. You can ask the hard, uncomfortable questions without anyone getting bent out of shape.
You can say, I think this is a mistake, while still valuing the human being. So I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to chew on. Something that builds on everything we've discussed today. Think back to the analogy of the shoes that are 2 sizes too small. Think about the assertion that people learn to hate their skin because the world relentlessly taught them they weren't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
If our society is the one manufacturing those shoes, if our society is the one actively, systemically teaching people that their natural skin, their natural features, their natural lineage isn't good enough, to the point that they would undergo radical medical transformations and rewrite their entire personal histories just to escape it. What does it say about us when we form internet mobs to mock and cancel the individuals who finally break under that pressure?
That is a profound question.
Why are we aiming our collective outrage at the casualties of colorism and identity confusion instead of dismantling the crushing pressure itself?
It's a heavy thought.
But it's one we need to sit with. Thank you for joining us on this complex journey today. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep thinking out loud. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.